All right, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining me this evening on this open Zoom. I will let you know that I am recording this, so I will be sending it out tomorrow morning and also posting it on our website. So it is available for folks who perhaps wanted to be part of the conversation but were unavailable, and at least they could hear kind of the conversation throughout the evening. So, I do have several of my administrative team on as well, so thank you to them for joining us this evening. And before we start, there's a couple things I'd like to say. First off, it's really important that, and there's a purpose of why I choose to do an open Zoom rather than our typical webinar that we oftentimes do for our board meetings, which is a little bit different setting. The open Zoom, I think, has a greater potential to have more of a conversation about various topics and to engage folks in the community. You're more than willing, if interested, but there's no requirement to do so. I would ask that you remain muted during, when other folks are speaking, or I have some slides to share with you this evening. I also think it's important to note that, obviously the topic that we're going to talk about this evening does bring up a lot of emotions in a variety of different ways. And it's really important that we have a civil discourse this evening, that we provide folks the opportunity to share their opinions. We may not agree with opinions, but it's important that we listen and we provide folks the opportunity to share those, and we treat each other respectfully as we have this conversation. Because I think at the end of the day, everyone on here can all agree that we want what's for our kids. We value our experiences in school every day for our kids. And it's really important for us, to work together as a community. So what I'm going to start out with first, and this is kind of the format that I'd like to have. We have some slides that we're going to share, specifically myself, and then I'm kind of tagging tonight with Dr. Cheryl Blankman, who is our Director of Special Services, and she's going to be sharing a few of our slides and kind of narrating through it. And then after our slide deck, what I'm going to do is open it up for discussion or any questions folks may have on any of the topics related to our slides. And I'm going to pull them up now just so you can kind of see where we are. So I'm calling this evening, Class 3 officer conversation, but it really is more than just that. So our agenda for this evening really is to talk about mental health support that we're providing for our students. I know that's come up in several meetings. So I wanted Dr. Blankman to have the opportunity to kind of share how we are supporting our students and how we also are supporting our parents. And obviously over the last 12 months has been really challenging with COVID, but even beyond that, mental health was on everyone's radar even before COVID. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of our Class 3 officers, because I think it's really important to point out there's been different opinions on what their role is as far as in our schools. So I want to make sure at the end of the evening, I'm crystal clear on what that expectation is, and then talk a little bit about the plan for our Class 3 officers moving forward. So that really is our agenda for the evening. And then when we're done with these 3 points, we'll obviously open up for questions. If you have questions related to the Class 3 officers, if you have questions or comments related to the mental health pieces that we're going to share, and we'll have the opportunity to have that discussion at that time. So I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, and I'm going to kind of move through the slides as she asked me to, but I'll turn it over to her, and she's going to talk about, the social and emotional and mental wellness programs and services we provide.
All right, well, hello and good evening, everyone. I know there's a lot that we want to be able to include tonight, and so I'm not going to take a ton of time, but I would invite anyone at any time, if you have questions or you want to know more, to please just reach out. I am happy to have these conversations. I'm excited to get to have these conversations so that everyone knows all of the really wonderful things that are happening in our schools. So can you move that for me, Mr. Souza? Thank you. Trauma sensitive, trauma practice, trauma informed. this language has made itself into a lot of our conversations, especially over the course of the last year, as we've all tried to grapple with how to support our families and support our students through the pandemic. I wanted to just take a minute to share some of the underlying principles of what it means to have a trauma-informed approach. These are from the National Center on Safe and Supportive Learning Environments. That is a link. So when the slides come out, that will take you to that government site. But if you just take a look for a minute at sort of the underpinnings of what creates a trauma-sensitive environment, I hope that what you will see is that a lot of these are very familiar themes for our district. And while I'm not going to do it tonight, I would invite and encourage you to take a look at our district goals and see just how well the goals that we have developed and invested in and embraced as a district really do find partnership in these underlying guiding principles for trauma-informed and what it means to be trauma-sensitive. Really the most important thing that I think I can underscore is that what makes this key that it's not compartmentalized. I'm almost there. But that what it means, no, it's good. What it means is that all of these goals, all of these priorities are things that we're infusing all the time into everyday practice.
Mute your phones.
Yeah, it's I think we have somebody out there that needs to mute. So if you can do that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Cheryl.
Okay, now you can go ahead. So yeah, there we go. I know this is a very busy slide. There's a lot of information on it. And at the same time, it is far from all the information that we would have to share. I hope that you're familiar with a multi-tiered system of support model. This is something that we use in the district for academics and for social emotional well-being and behavior supports. And the way that a multi-tiered system is structured is designed to help us make sure that we're providing every student with the supports and services they need for success. But it also is a way that we're identifying students who may need different levels or different interventions in order to be their most successful, best versions of themselves in and out of school. And so that foundation level, those tier 1 practices, these are things that I hope largely will sound familiar to you. You know our SEL initiatives, the mindfulness practices, our character education programs, but even some of the things when your child comes home and says they earned a Wildcat ticket or some leopard loot. These are all things that are part of the universal everyday practices that are infused in everything we do, that are part of building along those core principles. Of relationships and safety and security and what it means to see our children for the whole important persons that they are. For students who need it, when those tier 1 interventions are showing us that they may not just be quite enough support, we start to get into secondary interventions. And these things happen more in smaller group settings. It might happen as a result of something that would have been considered a discipline referral, but we're really working through conscious discipline in the way that we mediate those and work with our students. And then for students who need it, we go to a more individualized level of those tier 3. And at this point, we're really talking about things that are going to happen with a student and their family more one-on-one, and some linkages maybe to other connections. We may be helping to make a referral to some other agency or coordinated service to try to make sure that students are getting everything that they need.
Other ways.
These are just levels of intervention and levels of practice that this is how we do school. And when it comes to our social, emotional, and mental wellness for our students, it is every bit as much an integrated aspect of how we do school as our academics and everything else.
And now they're not having them.
Can you flip that for me, Mr. Souza? I wanted to just show you for a minute how we have gotten to where we are and how we continue moving ourselves forward. Go back one for me.
Sorry.
Thank you. So the things that I've listed here as far as staff education, everything that's underlined, there is a link to something that will give you more information, whether it's a slideshow that or a slide deck that has been part of a presentation or a website or something else. Again, this is, but everything that you see under the staff education side, these are things that are done with all staff. You know, so certainly we have specific staff within the district that we'll get to in the next slide who have far more education and professional development and ongoing pursuit of these themes. But the social emotional learning, the mindfulness, the conscious discipline, crisis prevention intervention, which I invite you to take a look at. Everyone has been trained on the verbal escalation methodologies of CPI, responsive classroom, our equity initiative, and cultural teaching. All of these are things that.
Hold on a minute, Cheryl.
Sorry.
Who's talking?
Is like giving feedback.
Yeah, just a reminder, if everyone could mute, it's really helpful as we're trying to, if you're coming on late, it's really important to mute your microphones. I'm just trying to look and see if there's anyone who's not muted that I can
Thank you.
get myself. All right, let's try again. I think we're in a better place. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Thanks. So along that staff education, as I was saying, this is comprehensive staff education that is prevalent throughout our professional and a lot of our paraprofessional staff as well. Some of the resources we've relied on, the social emotional learning competencies, the CASTLE framework, these are things that we have shared in the past. Crisis prevention, as I talked about, the entire district has been through conscious discipline training, which we continue to work on those practices. And of course, the culturally responsive teaching initiative that we've really invested in for this year that is part of our comprehensive equity plan. So again, not an exhaustive list, but I hope that you'll be starting to get a sense of how deep and broad the investment has been in ensuring this kind of environment for our entire community. Okay, ready to go. Next one.
I'm frozen.
There we go. So as I was saying, obviously, you know, there's a lot of development that we've done with all of our staff, but we do have rich staff of mental health and student support professionals in the district. So we do have, you know, our 4 school counselors, 1 in each elementary school, 2 at the middle school, high school. I just wanted to put this piece of data out there if it's helpful to have in mind. Across the state of New Jersey, this data is a couple years old, but if you go to the New Jersey School Counselor Association website, which is linked there, they'll have more information. On average, you're looking at a ratio of 358 students for every 1 mental health professional, every 1 counselor that you'd be finding in a school. So if you just look for a minute at our numbers and the staffing that we've invested in, you can see what a priority it is for our district and our community. We have our 2 additional student assistance counselors up at the middle school, high school. We have a school psychologist in the child study team, a social worker that's part of our child study team. We have our nurses in each individual school. And we actually work with more than 1 behavior specialist that, you know, again, are not behavior specialists that the district employs full time. But we have behavior specialists that we have built relationships with and that are there to support us and our students as they're needed. Some of the organizations that we are regularly taking information from and attending meetings with and just trying to stay up to date with include Hunterdon County Traumatic Loss Coalition, Family Crisis Intervention. Kayak is a
Then I'll go upstairs. Put your headphones in.
counselor. And again, all of these are things I invite you to go and explore and learn more And always, come back with questions or more conversation or something that you found that you make sure we're tuned in for. All really important and valuable. I think we can go to that next one. Just some of the things that have been part of our programming for the current year. And the first three of these you'll see are upcoming. That's why they're bolded out the way that they are. I hope that you will tune in to attend our equity and social justice coming up just later on this month. The anxiety and school avoidance is the next of our Care Plus presentations, which I believe is the same presenter who was with us earlier this month for anxiety and mental wellness. And then the social media accountability. All of these are really geared towards sharing as much information and providing opportunities for more questions and more conversation on all of the things that we know our students need, again, in order to be their most successful. At the bottom, you'll just see, if you look at our website and go to the curriculum instruction and assessment page, Mr. Hewitt has done a phenomenal job, not only of providing all of this parent information, but it's all really well organized. The links are live to be able to go back and see presentations that might have been given in the past, resources that have been shared in the past. And I would just invite everyone to explore all of those. So I know that it's a lot of information that I went through quickly, but I hope that it does a little bit of the work of just helping to show the extent of the investment and the commitment, so that there's just, a better sense of clarity in the ways that we're working to make sure that students are getting everything they need from us, academics, socially, emotionally, and with their mental wellness as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And the one thing I'll say just as a follow-up is that especially this slide here, we've really focused our attention on over the last several months to say, how can we engage our community and provide support for our parents with all the challenging topics that you see on this list. And there's more than just that. So this is something for us moving forward that we'll continue to do, provide these, Zooms where we can have some of our guest speakers come in and provide real life strategies and give the opportunities for our parents to have conversations, because we know how challenging it is. And it's really, really important that not only we support our students, but we also support our parents and our community as well. And as I said, to several people in discussions about, this topic, like, we don't want to be a district just doing what we have to do. We want to go above and beyond and really get creative on how we can provide services to our students, and how we can make sure that our students are supported in all different aspects of their time with us, not just the academic piece, because obviously the mental health is extremely important. And without, a strong foundation with the mental health, it obviously has a ripple effect on all different areas. So this will continue to evolve. We'll continue to look to get better and provide creative opportunities for our kids and for our parents. And it's something that you'll continue to hear about moving forward. This is not, a one-year thing. This is a ongoing every year thing. So again, thank you, Cheryl, for your efforts. So our class 3 officers. So I thought it was really important this evening to also talk about specifically what their roles are in our buildings, because I think that there has been conversations about what folks think their roles are compared to what they actually are. Just so you know, for some background, recently I had the opportunity to sit down with our class 3 officers, along with Lieutenant Brown from Lambertville and Lieutenant Skillman from West Amwell. And we met for about an hour and a half and really kind of talked about where are we, what are the expectations, and where do we want to go moving forward. And really made sure that we were all crystal clear as far as what the role is of our class 3 officers in our buildings. So basically, so we understand what that looks like. When we talk about school security, so our class 3 officers are responsible for school security and assisting with school security. And when we break that down, we talk about arrival and dismissal times, That could be traffic, that could be buses, that could be all kinds of different things. If we have special events or whatever it may be, obviously they're going to help facilitate that. The screening of visitors that come to our buildings, that could be, deliveries, it could be anything where anyone comes to our building. Safety checks, walking the building to ensure exterior doors are locked. We are required by the state to do monthly safety drills. So obviously they play a role in that, and they make recommendations on how we can improve based on our security practices. They also sit on a district security team that I facilitate, a safety and security team to talk about our safety practices and things where we can improve. And also if there are any, mandates to come down from the Department of Education that we need to implement, how we're going to implement that. At the elementary schools, really also supporting outside during recess. Obviously, with our students at Lambertville, because we are close to the road, and that has a tendency, traffic can be heavy on that road. It's really important that they're out there to make sure that all of our kids are safe, and there's no issues during our recess. West Amwell as well out supporting that. Viewing our security cameras. So right now at the middle school and high school, we have a limited amount, but we're looking to increase down the road. And obviously, if we have any issues or challenges where they need to view security cameras, exterior of the building, interior of the building, those types of things, that's something that we want to make sure that they have access to. We don't really have access to security cameras at our elementary schools. Down the road, that will be part of our facility conversations. And then if you're not familiar, we are just finishing up a secured vestibule in the middle school and high school building. We have had one at LPS for quite some time, but in essence, the thought process is if we do have someone who comes to visit the building, that is where they're screened in that security vestibule. If they have an appointment, obviously to make sure they get to where they're going to and who they're there to see. If they don't have an appointment, then kind of working through that process of if they're just showing up and the person's not available, helping facilitate that to make sure that we keep our building in a safe manner. I think it's really important for you all to understand, and this is something we talked extensively about, that if an incident occurs in or outside of school that requires the involvement of law enforcement, the principal will reach out to either Lieutenant Brown if it's a Lambertville issue or Lieutenant Skillman if it's a West Amwell issue, so that a patrol officer would handle the investigation. That is not something our Class 3 officers will be involved with or would be involved with, because that's not their role. So let's say we had a case where outside of school there was some type of cyber harassment or a threat was made online or something along those lines that kind of rolls into the school building. That is not something the Class 3 officer will deal with. And that's important to distinguish that difference. It is something that obviously Lieutenant Brown and Skillman will decide which patrol officer will either come to the building and do a report with the building principal, or perhaps in some cases, they would be going to the house of the parents of one of the students or both students, because perhaps the parents were, wanted to file charges or something along those lines, depending upon if it was criminal in nature. So I think it's really important for them to understand that they are not part of that process. What are they not doing? So they are not involved in student discipline. The principal is not going to be in a situation where if there was a discipline issue with a student, let's say in a classroom, where they would be radioing the Class 3 officer to say, please go down and get Johnny Jones out of math class and bring him down to my office. There's all kinds of issues with that. There's all kinds of perception issues with what that looks like, the impact on the student, and that's not what their role is. Obviously, if there's an issue with the student, either the principal is going down to handle that situation or the vice principal in this case for the middle school, high school, not the Class 3 officers. In the cafeteria we've talked about, there could be the perception of students that if they were walking through the cafeteria that they're, watching them or looking to see if they're doing something wrong. Again, that's not their purpose there. So that's not something where we would see them in the cafeteria during lunch periods. And I think, there has been some misconceptions about, they're arresting students. I mean, we've had this program now for just about 2 years. We have not had one arrest since the Class 3 officers started 2 years ago. So that is not happening. I know there's been stories about, what has happened or supposedly happened. I can tell you from the statistics, that is not the case. And then, folks have asked, well, what if you have a scenario where, let's say, two students get into a physical altercation in the hallway, and let's say the class 3 officer is the only adult around, and how they can handle it. And the first inclination is they're going to kind of break up that fight and then arrest both students for getting involved in that altercation. And that just simply is not the case. And what they would do is handle it just like any other adult in the building, whether it was them or a teacher who was in the building. The hope would be that they could break up the altercation to ensure that the students are safe. And then what they're going to do is they're going to refer it to the school administration to address. And obviously, if there's anything beyond that that's legal, then that's something that's going to go through our lieutenants to decide how it's going to be handled next. It's not something that they're going to be involved with, because again, that's not the reason why they're in our buildings. So again, it's important for that distinguishment to be made as far as what their role is. And then training for our class 3 officers. So we've had a lot of conversations about this. And as hopefully everyone knows, equity is a big part of what we're doing now in the district as far as our goals are concerned. It is one of our goals. It will continue to be one of our goals. We've been doing a lot of work with our staff this year. We're starting to do work with our students. So what I want to let you know is that our class 3 officers also play a role in that. They are staff members in our building. So they should be as part of our equity training as anyone else would be. And part of that started today. So I had the opportunity to sit in this morning with our class 3 officers all morning, a training that was facilitated by a gentleman by the name of Marlon Webb, who did an outstanding job this morning. We had great conversations, and we started out first today was all about implicit bias. And then our training tomorrow is all about cultural competency and kind of where we go from there. So that is something obviously took place today and will take place tomorrow. And an important part of, the work that we're doing with our folks. I intend on surveying students and staff now that, especially since things are opening up a bit more, where we're going to have more students back. I want to survey students and staff to get their impression of having class 3 officers in our building, and what are their thoughts? What do they think their purpose is for? Have they had opportunities to interact with them? If they have they been positive? Have they been negative? What does that kind of look like? And then I want to set up small focus groups that I'll help facilitate. So I've been having conversations with our staff who have the opportunity to work with a lot of our Latinx population or our students of color. And I'm looking to help bridge with that staff member, with those students, and also community focus, to really have the opportunity to set up small focus groups to get the impression of our Latinx and our students of color of how they feel. And based on obviously what's going on in our world and what we've seen on TV, and then how does that translate into their experience within our school walls? And it's really important to collect some data on that. And then I also want to have small focus groups with teachers, specifically at all 3 levels, both of our elementary schools and then our middle and our high school, to get an idea of their thought process and what's going through their mind when it comes to this topic. And then I think it's important that we provide opportunities to have open forums with community members, our class 3 officers, and a facilitator to really have the opportunity to have a discussion as we're having this evening, and to hear different points of view and different thoughts. And also to have that happen with our high school students, to have the class 3 officers available and a facilitator to help facilitate that conversation. I think it's really, really important. One of the biggest takeaways that I had from our training this morning was, the terminology of just inclusive habits, that we all have inclusive habits. It's really important for us to spend time with folks that may not look like us, that may not sound like us, whatever it may be, that come from different cultural backgrounds. So we have a better understanding, because we have a tendency not to do that. We have a tendency to more surround ourselves with people that look like us. And obviously, that doesn't work when we're talking about equity work. So we need to provide those avenues for those types of conversations and that type of discourse to occur. And then what I want to do is, based on the information that we collect, I would like to do a training on restorative practices. I've had some conversations with someone about organizing a training, but honestly, their recommendation was really the next steps of where we go from here is is that we'll design that training based on the feedback that we get from our small focus groups and our survey data. It's really, really important to collect that feedback, get that information from all the different groups that you're working with, and then from there, we can kind of design that training around that. And that restorative practice training would be for our Class 3 officers. So, that just shows you in detail, there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of pieces that are going to take some time. And what I'm saying is that I am recommending to the board that our Class 3 officers are included in our budget for next year. I feel strongly that as our new leader, it's extremely important for me to have the opportunity to evaluate this program and not evaluate it using national data, but evaluating it using data from our own students and our own staff. And unfortunately, at this point, because of kind of where we are and how challenging this year has been, I don't have that data yet. I need to have those conversations. I need to collect that survey data. I need to get an idea of kind of where we are with this program. And then from there, really over the next 12 months, complete that work and then report out to the board at this time next year and the community to kind of let you know where things are and kind of how we've evolved in a process. I've said this before and I'll say it again. There's no doubt that there's been challenges in our country with a lot of different things, but specifically with incidents involving law enforcement. And I'm not going to sit here and deny that. But at the same time, as an educator, I really struggle with not trying to change that perception in my community that I work based on the individuals that I interact with on a daily basis and make a difference. If there is a perception of what law enforcement is viewed as, then I think we need to try to work together again on those inclusive habits to somehow move forward from that and not just kind of ignore that it exists and kind of move on. I struggle with that as being an educator because that's not what educators do. They try to educate and work through challenges and problems for the betterment of not only our school community, but our community as a whole. So I think that if we can impact in a positive way our own community that we live in, while we may not be able to control what happens throughout our country or throughout the world, we do have control of what happens within our own community. And I think this is an important enough topic that we focus on that, see where we go, see where we evolve, and collect feedback throughout that process to get an idea of where we are and where we need to improve. So hopefully you have an idea of where I am with this. You have an idea of our training. I will tell you, I've not developed this in isolation. I've been working with several individuals, Dr. Kelly, who will be hosting a community forum on Tuesday next week on the 23rd, obviously with Mr. Webb, some other folks that I've been working with that have been recommended by Dr. Kelly. So I feel like I've gone to experts in the field to really work through kind of where we are and based on, where I want to go and their recommendations to try to develop something that's comprehensive moving forward. For the benefit of all. So at this point, I'm going to stop. And what we'll do is, and to do this in an organized fashion, I would ask that if you have a question or you would like to make a comment, that you raise your hand and then I will call upon you to ask your question. And it could be about anything that I presented, or it could be anything that Cheryl presented in related to mental health. So I will open it up again. If you were interested, I did disable the chat feature. You probably figured that out by now. I probably should have said that earlier. I just find, especially when we have a large group like this, it's much easier to interact with each other where we're unmuting and having conversations rather than trying to follow, conversations, but at the same time, also, a chat that's going. So Rebecca Smith-Casey, I will start out with you. You can go ahead and speak.
Hi, Rebecca Smith-Casey. I'm in West Amwell. I wanted to thank you for sort of the comprehensive approach that you took to this tonight. Cheryl, I really appreciate the way that you outlined all of the trauma-focused initiatives that are being taken in the district. For anybody that does not know me, I am a trauma-focused psychologist doing trauma work with kids and adults. So I'm really impressed with how well our district is addressing these needs, particularly in the midst of a global pandemic, which is sort of a common trauma. As it relates to the Class 3 officers, I really appreciate the fact, Tony, that you are taking the approach of looking at data for our district, as opposed to assuming that data that is drawn from research coming from large urban areas is applicable to our schools. And so I just really want to commend you and Cheryl both for sort of outlining everything and taking the approaches that you're taking. And I do appreciate the fact that you're recommending the Class 3 officers. Knowing that Officer Bartzak was not in school this morning, on school drop-off this morning, we noticed his absence on 179 with the cars whizzing by and sort of that aspect of it. So I really do commend the sort of wait and see approach here. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Manisha.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. I really appreciate it. I do have a comment because you had said that you were going to recommend to the board that we move forward with the Class 3 officers, and then you're going to look at the data that's gathered and then reassess next year. And to me, usually you look at the data and then you make the recommendation, not the other way around. I have a science background, so that sounds a little, it doesn't seem like it's the right path. So that was all I wanted to say. I mean, I think that the data that you're going to look at is really good, but I think that making that recommendation without having that data and knowing that there is a portion of the district that feels strongly about this is kind of feels like we're not being heard. So that's all I'm going to say, and that's it. So thank you for listening, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Manisha. And just to clarify, I guess the approach and the reason why I'm taking the approach is, quite honestly, I wish I could have maybe dedicated more time to this in the beginning of the year, but obviously there was some other things upon my arrival that were challenging with COVID and things along those lines. So I do feel as though I need to provide a little bit more time for myself. And
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the reason why I took that approach.
And I 100%, I can, commend you for the job that you're doing, Mr. Suzo, with coming in with the pandemic and everything else, and the schools. You're doing a great job. So it's just, it's frustrating about the Class 3 officers because there's definitely very strong opinions, and it's just, it's disappointing.
Understood.
Thank you.
Sean.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for holding this meeting, and to Dr. Blankman for also sharing what we've been doing on the mental health front. And I think I just want to start off by saying that I know that we all share the fear of a school shooting, that which is the reason why some people believe that the Class 3 officers need to be present. I think that my issue with the Class 3 officers' presence is that they don't alleviate the fear, that fear, and because they're not proven to be effective. And I think that what a lot of us are saying are that there are other ways and better ways to get to the root of the problem of school shootings. We know that most school shootings happen with firearms obtained from the homes or homes of relatives or friends. So, addressing that issue, there are, this a rural community, so there are firearms in the community. And so I want to make sure that we're addressing fire safety concerns. I've heard some anecdotes about kids forgetting their shotguns from hunting in the car and everything. I mean, that kind of thing is not acceptable, and that, that's not responsible ownership. So I think that there are things we could do to really address this issue. And what I think a lot of us are saying is that the Class 3 officer does not address the issue, and it's a false sense of security, and it actually can do harm. And I think, the last speaker had a good point about gathering the data first as generally a form of harm reduction, just to, be able to gather that data before you make a decision. So that's really important, I think. And it affects other people too. It affects like my kids. I don't know how you feel about this, Tony, but there are people who have left the school, kids who have left the school over this issue. My kids are friends with kids who they don't get to see anymore because they left the school over this issue. And I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, I would like, as a superintendent, to make everybody at my school feel safe, So I would love to hear what you think about that. And I think that's my comment.
Thanks, Sean. I mean, honestly, I would really want to have a conversation with those parents and to find out why, why specifically the kids were so fearful and what kind of led to that. And depending upon how old the kids are, I would love to speak to them, but obviously if they're, younger and maybe that's too heavy of a conversation, I'm not sure, but that is something I really would like to try to find out more information on. So if you have that information of those individuals and they're willing to speak to me, I would appreciate if you could email me that and I could reach out and set up some time to speak with them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Connor.
Thanks for doing this. I just wanted to say, everybody's all upset about these Class 3 officers being in the school. They say they're upset, but nobody's saying really why, And I'm just curious as to why everybody's so up in arms about this, So yeah, I'd almost throw it back to the last few people that talked. Why? That's what I want to know. Why?
Well, I mean, I can kind of speak on that a little bit based on some of the feedback that I've heard, a lot of feedback on the topic of just, a concern about whether or not, as Sean said, about a false sense of security. If there was a real emergency, will it make a difference? And then obviously our, students of color, their perception based on some things that have happened in our country, obviously over the last couple of years, and things that they've witnessed on, TV or social media, and a fear factor, right? A fear of something like that is going to happen to them. So these are all big questions and big conversations, and it lands on people.
There are police, they're out there that this is a great opportunity to change those fears and make them less, like Steve Bartzak's phenomenal guy. He's going to make everybody who's around him relax more about seeing a cop and a gun and all that. So sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. And I agree. I mean, it's hard. I think it's really important to try not to stereotype. In any profession, there are unfortunately sometimes folks who don't handle things the way they should. So, it's challenging, but what we don't want to do is just automatically assume that every individual would do that. So that's, just trying to work through that. Michael Bird.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the presentations. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can, Michael.
Great. Okay. Michael Bird, I'm and my wife, we live on Main Street, Lambertville, so we're close to the school. We're probably one of the few grandparents you have on the call tonight.
Okay.
We have 4 grandchildren, luckily, in Lambertville, 3 of which are registered to go to the elementary school in Lambertville next year. And I appreciate the presentations, but I have a comment, but I also have a compromise to suggest to you, Superintendent. You can probably tell from my British twang that I grew up in England and spent my school days in England, and then I've been over here now 45 years, and I'm an American citizen and so on. But I remember from my school days that I grew up being shown how to avoid bombs. And later on in my student days, I was tutored in how to look at tables in cafes to see if there was a terrorist bomb put under the table. And to this day, when I dig the garden, I come across something metallic, I immediately shrink back. To this day, when I go into somewhere like Chives next door to us, I look under tables. It's inherent because that's what I learned as a young school child. And I feel my image of policemen come really from England, and they're unarmed and so on, friendly fellows. I have no problems with the Lambertville police, and probably no problem at all with a Class 3 officer. But I do feel that young kids at the age of 5 to 12 are very impressionable. And while I can understand you getting data, Superintendent, I don't see why that can't be done from middle school and high school, where I could possibly see and entertain the need for Class 3 officers. But to have them in the elementary school with kids 5 years through to 11 or so, I just don't think is necessary. Plus the fact I think it does seed an unquestionable fear. And I challenge you, I bet that some of you, possibly you, Superintendent, too, remember in your school days being taught during the Cuba crisis to go under the table in fear of bombs attacks. And I bet you that still stays in your memory. So I'd like to suggest that you possibly avoid putting Class 3 officers into the elementary school in Lambertville immediately and see what the data comes from the other schools. So thanks for your time to listen to me.
Thank you. Brian Lawton.
Hey, Tony. Again, I just want to reiterate what Rebecca said. I want to thank you for, the presentation tonight. And obviously, I understand that you haven't been there for a year yet. So for you to get that opinion or knowledge of what's going on, I think you need a longer period of time to see that for yourself, not what other people are telling you. So I think that taking the next year to look at it, obviously, I'm going to always be pro police and resource officer anyway. But for your sake, going forward and getting the data moving forward and not depending on other people and getting your thoughts is definitely the way to go. And I think one of the stats already that shows, people are saying, oh, well, the stats already don't show that it doesn't help. Well, has anything happened in our schools since the Class 3 officers were there? No, there hasn't been. So maybe that's a statistic that it is working. Whether it would have happened or wouldn't, it looks like nothing has happened. So I think that's a positive statistic if you want to talk about that. Like you said, it's education. Yeah, we've all had the DARE meetings when we were younger. I don't know if that stuff still happens, but I'm sure if there was uncomfortable parents, maybe they should come to you or the principals. And I would assume that you guys would be more than happy to sit down with the officer and the students and have a conversation. Talk to the students. Let the Class 3 officer talk to them. Let them know what their job is. Let them know. Educate them. Not just say, well, police officers are bad. They're scaring my kids. I said it before on the one other meeting. God forbid something happens. Everybody's going to be like, where was the officer at? Who took charge? It just seems that you're taking the right approach. Take the next year, gather all the correct information, not going off the past. You haven't been there that long. And that's the correct way to do it. I could say a lot more, but I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Miss Mary.
Hi. First, I want to apologize. I'm in the shadows here. I don't mean to be. It's
That's
just
okay.
the lighting in my home. For those of you that don't know me, I am the preschool teacher at Lambertville Public School. And just a few comments. And first, Officer Jerry is fantastic. The children are not afraid at all of Officer Jerry. They're used to him. Officer Jerry has purchased books for my students. The children are learning about community helpers, and that's just who Officer Jerry is. At recess time, we have both classes out there at once, and I feel so much better having Officer Jerry there because there are so many preschool children who maybe, need help with some of the playground equipment, or we're resolving some, sharing and taking turn issues that I cannot watch the outskirt of the playground area, but I know Jerry is. So, I feel like it's in today's world, we need to value our children. And I just feel like Jerry is there to protect us, and the children are not afraid at all. I just had to make that clear that, the preschoolers actually enjoy talking to Jerry, and there's no fear whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Mary. Erica?
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Erica.
Thank you very much for tonight's presentation. I appreciate it. I just have a few comments. I forgot a couple already, but our kids, for years, I've gone to the school and at West Amwell School, and I've taken pictures of the Halloween parade, and there's 27 kids dressed up as police officers that are all the younger grades, some of the older grades too, but many of the younger children are dressed up like firefighters and policemen, and they admire them. So it's not like we have 20 armed officers with heavy whatever weaponry hanging all over them that are walking around like these stoic characters in the hallways. We have one officer in each elementary school and the two at the middle school, high school. There have been a bunch of times where the one door got stuck, it was broken at the high school, and it was stuck open, and all I had to do was kind of motion to the resource officer, and they went down and they shut the door, and they would have found that anyway because they do the security checks. But you don't really know how long it would have been that door would have remained open if they weren't there. So I don't think that the kids are in any harm's way having our officers in the school. They're friendly, they're cheerful, they help with dismissal, they help with other things like the playground duty. I didn't know that, but I'm sure that's I'm sure that happens every day, because that's just the kind of people that they are, that we have. We're very lucky to have the people that we have on staff, and I appreciate them, and I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Lori? Lori Howe? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I do think it's a fair plan. Most of what you've always presented to us has been fair, so I appreciate that, and it was a pretty comprehensive plan. I do want to reiterate that I think firearm safety education is so crucial right now, because everything starts at the home, and then it's supported by your community, and your school is part of that. So I think that was just a super important point to make. I'm also really glad that you're reaching out to our community specifically, our kids and staff, and even parents that may not always be able to get on a Zoom call, or would be fearful to, or not understand how, or whatnot, busy, working. I think feet on the street are important. And I've said it before, we like to talk for communities and people and all of that. And I think the best way to get yourself, some street cred is to go to those people and say, I've talked to them, talked to the children, I've talked to the parents, and I think you're doing that. And I really, really, really appreciate that. I also want to thank you for just reiterating the importance of positive interactions with law enforcement. I think it's necessary more now than ever to kind of try to rebuild and repair, and also to the children, and show that your experience can be different. I think a lot of times you don't get that experience with officers till you're older and you're getting in trouble, so I really feel like it doesn't hurt. My personal opinion is it doesn't hurt to have the officer there. It could potentially help if you do it the right way, get the community feedback, do firearm safety. I think it's a good plan, and I really appreciate the comprehensive, the way you're going about it, Tony. I appreciate it for our community and, just the whole district.
Thanks, Lori.
Welcome.
Corky and Carrie Brown.
Hi there. Thanks, Tony, for the comprehensive presentation. We really appreciate it over here. I just had a couple things to say. I think that it's great that so many people are comfortable with the Class 3 officers, especially, making significant relationships with them. Their kids are comfortable with them, but there's a lot of people in this community who are not comfortable. And I think if we're talking about our community, we have to take into account that there's a lot of people in our community and some are not comfortable with this. And our family is one of them. Again, this is not about a specific police officer. I'm sure they're lovely, kind people, but there's a real problem with policing in our country. And that is, a very pervasive problem. And I know we're talking about our local community right now, but we can't shy away from the fact that this is a real problem in our country. And we have lots of kids of color in our community that may not be comfortable with police. And we have kids who are, white, who might be uncomfortable with this, and parents. And I think, looking at our community at large, we have to take into account, everybody's feelings and thoughts. And, I heard a lot tonight about, having a positive relationship with police. And I think there's other ways of doing that rather than having armed officers in our schools. And we could have assemblies with police officers, and we can talk about policing in class, but there doesn't need to be an armed guard, I don't believe, in our schools. And the last thing I just want to say is I appreciate the fact that that you want to have surveys and focus groups. I think that's really a great idea. I just worry that how are you going to be able to navigate the fact that some people are not going to feel comfortable honestly answering some of these questions. I think that's a really important point to think about moving forward if the officers are in fact in the school, because I think there'll be quite a few people who are not comfortable and they may not feel confident enough to share that. So thank you again.
Thank you. And the only thing I'll say to that is I agree with you. And I think it's really important for me to bridge that gap to be able to have the opportunity to meet with those individuals in their community and utilize resources of folks they do trust to hopefully help bridge that conversation. So that is something I've been thinking a lot about as of lately and who those individuals are. Shara.
Hi, thank you. And thanks a lot for the presentation. I really appreciate that you are trying to listen to everybody and find a way to make this work. And I also just want to acknowledge everybody who's on the call, that there are a lot of different opinions and most of us feel strongly. And I just want to say that, I understand we're all either parents or community members, educators who care about our kids, and all want the best things. And a lot of what we are, our perspectives are coming from, personal experiences. In terms of the presentation, there were just a couple of things that I was curious about. One is about the security cameras. And I believe you said if we have an issue where the officers would need to view the video that they could. But I guess I'm curious if they also have sort of daily access to the video, if they would be viewing that, why they would be viewing it, what they could do with that information. And another question is, why won't we have an open forum with the elementary students? I think that if we are willing to have an officer in school with them, then why can't we have them in that conversation? I think I know that kids are different, and I know obviously that we have some 4 and 5-year-olds in there. But I do think that if it's, if it's part of their world, that we should acknowledge that with them. I think that if we don't, basically we are sending a message that says, we believe this is, we are doing this to make you safe. We believe this is a positive thing, but we're not opening that to any kind of, questioning or discussion. And I wonder too, I'm guessing when you collect data that overall, it will be mostly positive. But I wonder if any of the questions will sort of say, well, and I don't think you'd say it this way, but do you understand why people might not be comfortable with officers? Do you see what this issue is? And while I understand that you want to keep this very local, part of where my fear comes from is from what happens throughout our country, and New Jersey. I mean, New Jersey is a problematic state. But I've done tons of research and have really been trying to look all over the place. And what is happening nationally is troubling. And I don't believe that our students and our communities should get a pass because we're lucky enough to live in a place where we don't have a lot of crime. I think that we, as much as people say we should be helping to create a positive perspective of law enforcement, I think if we only do that, then we're doing a great disservice to our students because they're not always going to live here. And they should understand, I mean, this is a huge topic, especially over the last year. We owe it to our students to discuss it, to educate all of them, and, let them look at the whole picture and see where they come out. And the last thing, and I don't want to take too long to say this, but for me, I don't have a problem with any of our officers. I have a kid at LPS. Officer Jerry seems wonderful. Clearly, the folks in West Amwell, I'm really impressed with how much positive there is about your officer. But for me personally, every time I see a police officer, I'm scared. Every time. And I know I've talked to some other people and they say the same thing. When walking down the street and a police car goes by me and my heart races, or I'm driving and, a police car comes up behind me and I'm nervous. And there's no real rational reason for that. And I started to think about it as I've been thinking about this issue. And I thought, well, why is this? It seems so strange because my favorite aunt and uncle were police officers and I loved them and I was their favorite niece and we had this wonderful relationship. And throughout my life up until now, every time I've been pulled over, I've had the officer has been very kind to me, it's been very positive. And then I remembered that I had this one experience in college with a security officer, and it was really negative. However, there were 2 other officers at school. One of them I knew well enough to sort of stop and chat. Another one helped me out in a terrible situation and couldn't have been nicer, and then always followed up, was kind. This one time I had a negative experience. And the officer was extremely intimidating. And basically what happened was there was a follow-up where I met with him and then maybe a dean. And what he had told me in the time that the incident happened, when that came up at the meeting, I said, well, this is what he said happened. And he lied. And he said, no, That's not what happened. That's not what I said. And I realized in that moment that I was completely powerless, that there was nothing I was going to say that would have any effect if he's saying something else. And the feeling of vulnerability and powerlessness was so big that it still sticks. That I understand there are a lot of great officers, but you don't know when you're going to have an experience when you don't. And I imagine if I were going to school or had a job where I had a police officer there all the time, I would feel scared every day. You know, I wouldn't be able to focus. So, you know, while people are, it's not about these 4 people, because experiences last. And I can't imagine that if I had to feel this pressure all the time, you know, how I would manage that. So, you know, it's a personal thing. I do also think looking at what happens nationally is super, super important. We can't ignore it. And the truth is that if we're only looking at local data, then we don't need officers, because we don't, I mean, even before we had officers, I don't think we ever had any, I don't know of any terrible emergencies that would need officers. So I think we need to look at the bigger picture as well as this smaller picture. So thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Actually, okay, 1 second, okay, thank you so much for taking the time to have this meeting with us. I know, Tony, you and I have spoken a couple of times, and Cheryl, it's good to see you after all these years. You know, I know you well, and I'm very pleased to see you in the position that you're in, and it makes me feel much more confident that good things are happening up at South and in the district as a whole. I think I want to tie in for all of us. So first of all, let me say that I think we are all extremely concerned about the physical safety and well-being of all of our children. My daughter graduated last year, so I actually don't have children in the school now, but they had been in the district for a very long time. I care very much about the safety and well-being of the staff and faculty. And but at the same time, we're having this discussion now for a reason. And a good friend of mine talked to me and said, well, why now and what happened? And I'm just going to tell you my story about why now for me and what happened to have me speak up, which is not my favorite thing to do. Last summer, my daughter and a few of her friends, but mostly her friends, organized a demonstration for Black Lives Matter. It was in the middle of COVID, so it was carefully planned out. It was a relatively small but very committed group of our young people. Some are still students at South, and it was in relation to what we do see going on nationally. And I think this is the right time to be having this discussion. And I just want to share with you some experiences that you may not expect to hear, that I witnessed myself, and that stories that I heard personally from the students of color and even some of our students who are white. During one of the demonstrations, we were walking past, and I sort of followed them as like sort of mama duck, you know, like I wanted to make sure everybody was okay. And, you know, I stayed back a little bit. And I don't remember if it was the first or second one, but there was one demonstration in which we were making a turn right at the city hall, going to the park where the students were going to speak. And there was a man from our community who was holding a Confederate flag. And the children knew this man from the community. He's a volunteer. And that was very disturbing to me. I could not figure out why a white man in Lambertville would be holding up a Confederate flag. It made no sense to me, except that it felt like it might have been to be intimidating or to make a statement opposite what the kids were trying to say, which is Black Lives Matter. And they were trying to demonstrate their feelings on this matter. So that was, he was also saying some very inappropriate things that the children heard. And they talked to me about it afterwards. And I encouraged them to go speak to people at the school, which apparently they did. And apparently that situation has been handled. So I don't know what you call that. And I am not ever saying that anybody on this call, has any racist views, but our children have been exposed in our town to racist views. They've had experiences of racism. One of the students that I know quite well spoke, and she said that her experience as a student of color, she thought it was considered bullying, what she experienced in elementary school. But as she got older and became more educated and understood more, she realized, looking back, that it was more racism than bullying, but she didn't have the language for that, being really one of the few people of color in our community, and also our staff and faculty being, 99% white. So many of us don't, this was an eye-opener for me, is what I'm trying to say. I listened to her and I listened to several other students speak. And I think our school is a wonderful school for many of our students, but I think now is the time for us to listen to how it can be a better school for all of our students, especially our minority students, our students of color. One thing that another student brought up was, how Black history is represented in the school. And I do commend you, Mr. Suzo, for making efforts. I'm very happy to hear your equity plan. And I do know that things are moving in the right direction. What struck me too was another student who spoke that when her family goes out into the community, and not everybody stays in Lambertville, they go, to Trenton, or they go to other communities where their interactions with, whether it's the police or other people, are not, they don't always feel that their family members are safe because of the color of their skin. So I think this is, why now? I think because this is what's happening nationally, but I think it's a good opportunity, without calling anybody out for, bad behavior, but to just say, we need to have this discussion, and it's okay to have this discussion. The other things I have become aware of, or have been aware of in the past year, are things on social media with some of our students and their racist comments. I know that there was an incident up at the school around this time last year with racial slurs on the billboard, the front of the school. Those are all things that hurt people of color, but they also hurt all of us, who are in this community. And I just think now is the time to start having a discussion about these things. And, while the police officers that are in Lambertville and West Amwell are individual good people and perhaps good role models, I think it is time to take a look at what police in general represent to people of color. And it doesn't always make people of color feel safe. Yeah. And just like Shara said, when a person has a negative experience, I have several family members who are police officers, but when I get pulled over, my heart does race. I mean, we do have a sense of like, uh-oh, did I do something wrong? So I think we need to think about the impact that, policing could have on our students, and just consider whether or not the roles that the Class 3 officers have right now could be held by other people, like on the playground. There are other staff members that keep an eye on traffic. There are crossing guards that could address the issues. Even at West Amwell, 179 is crazy. So you absolutely want somebody there directing traffic. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I hope that we can continue to have a civil conversation. It all sounds very civil to me so far. And I think it's important to keep it that way and to address everyone's concerns. So I thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Michael Strauss.
Hey, Tony, how are you? I'm going to keep with my tradition of turning on my video for this because, again, like I said on the school facilities debate, I think it is important for us to all see each other's faces and see ourselves as humans talking about this. It is really important. First, let me thank you and Dr. Blankman for co-presenting tonight, and realizing that there is more to this discussion than just the whole, is there a cop in the school thing? So I sat down to prepare for the meeting, and my intention was to look at the same research that I looked at years ago when I spoke out with the same concerns that I'm hearing right now from my fellow district's parents. A lot's changed since that board meeting. 3 years ago. Without a doubt, there is frankly more to be afraid of in today's world. But there's still that fear that was at the root of my stand 3 years ago. We all, I think, need to acknowledge that policing in this country isn't equitable. Racism still exists. And all of our kids, not just mine, but all of our kids are growing up in that world. My fear here is even deeper rooted because, you know, I'm white. I've got kids who are not. And I can feel at moments completely unprepared to get them ready for this. And then there's still the multitude of fears that brought on the need for the discussion of the Class 3 officer to begin with. So basically, there's no reason for any of us to sleep across the board. And I've lost a lot of hours of sleep in consideration of these fears. Not just feeling them, but contemplating them and struggling not to live in them. But I have to tell you, one of the many fears and worries that I don't have as a parent, husband, son, neighbor, and patriot is that Steve Bartzak is an asset to West Amwell School. He is a man that exudes so many things that I want my children to be exposed to: bravery, thoughtfulness, calm, caring, logic, and duty. He's taken an ardent opponent of the Class 3 program, and he's converted me. I know my children are safer with him. I know my kids benefit from his presence, his teaching, his ability to bridge the divide that we all fear between law enforcement and the communities they work in. We've heard it over and over and over again tonight. If it's broken, why take something that is working, that's an example, and try to get rid of it? Why not take that and lift it up and show the world that we know how to do this, that this man knows how to do this, that this man is an example. I know that every cop is not like him. We see examples in the national headlines, but here in West Amwell, I don't. I see officers who are involved in our community, who show up, who deal with crises great and small. I also see here in this district that other people show up. I agree, cops should not be alone in dealing with crises. We've all proven that in the last year. I've watched you, I've watched Cheryl, I've watched the principals, all of the professionals that are out there problem solve together to achieve better results. We as a district have been true examples in dealing with the cards that we've been dealt with COVID. And yes, many things and earlier decisions would have made COVID decisions easier. But we have the present and the future to deal with here this evening. And Tony, I cannot thank you enough for continuing to support the Class 3 officers. I also cannot thank you enough for addressing the concerns that you've already have been voiced by members of our community, not just the white members of our community, but the members of color. It needs to be addressed. I I'd also hope that we as a community begin to apply some priority to issues that can change the very parameters of this debate. Our schools are outdated. They lack adequate security measures. And we can't address the class 3 officer debate without resolving the facility issue. I would implore my neighbors to not divide into factions on this issue, and still implore them not to divide into factions on the school facility issue. We need to keep the discussion on race, diversity, and its impact on education and parenting moving forward. It can't happen if all we do is speak from a soapbox, and it can't happen if we deny the need for all of us to address racism as parents. It's on all of us. It just is. Let's listen to each other. Let's take in what we're saying, and let's prepare our hearts and minds to discuss this further once the facilities issue has been resolved.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
Paul.
Oh boy, I gotta follow that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, sorry, and I wish I had my camera on, but this computer is not outfitted with a camera. But I think Elizabeth and Michael have pushed this conversation forward. I actually had, when I raised my hand, I had 3 questions, which I think are now irrelevant based on the comments that Elizabeth made. And then, so I'm kind of adjusting my comments here, but it's going to be focused on race, which I think is the issue. I mean, my initial questions were, when were class 3 officers incorporated into the schools? I don't know if it was after 2012 or somewhere around there. My guess is that it was. So we're dealing with, is that correct?
It was only about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay, way off. All right. And then the other questions were, when did the complaints come up? And then Elizabeth kind of answered those questions for me, and why we're talking about this now and pushing on that thread. And Michael mentioned, the class 3 officer that is now there. And I've interacted with him a few times. My kids are in elementary school. My son, who's in 2nd grade, wrote a letter to him. He wrote back. So we've had nothing but great experiences with him. But even if our interactions with the class 3 officers that are present are good, we still have the race issue in the community. And the question is, how do we solve that? And this is a question back to those folks who are raising the complaints. And I'm going to try to get to the point, if officers were either minority or female, would that make a difference? And by no means is my question despairingly. I'm just trying to move the conversation forward to push on what exactly is the issue here. Is it a police officer? Is it a race issue? Is it a gender issue? And if it is, then let's deal with those issues. That's all.
Thanks, Paul. Terry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I should put my camera on because Michael said something.
Hello.
Okay. Hi. I just have to make a comment. There's a national narrative, and then there's the narrative that I see every day at school. And I see children that are very comfortable and happy and have a good relationship with our officer, Jerry. And he's a huge asset to our routine, our daily routine at school. And the kids actually see it as a treat to stop and talk to him in the hallways. And I just say, if we follow the national narrative or whatever it is, what are we teaching our kids? Why can't we have our own narrative? This is the way we do it. And another thought that I was thinking about is people are afraid of, because he has a gun. I mean, how many kids are on Fortnite? How many kids are on some of these games and they don't think anything about it? I mean, think of the whole picture. What do we, I mean, I grew up with police in our school. They're undercover policemen, but we knew they were there and we knew they had guns, but it was just part of everyday routine. They were there for our safety. We never thought anything of it. So I have to, the kids are not afraid. There's no fear whatsoever in any of them that I see every day. There's a confidence and there's just happiness, and he's just part of the family. And so I'd like to see that continue. So thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Mhm.
Connor.
Going, sorry about that. So I guess I was wondering, gosh, it kind of caught me off guard here. I had a million questions. Then Michael Strauss hopped on and basically fixed everything for me, in all honesty. I just don't understand what people are worried about or upset about. I just kind of, everyone says they are, nobody's telling us why. Somebody said something about, I had a bad experience with a security guard or something like that. And then because of that one experience, I'm now deathly afraid of police and don't want to be around police ever. But I don't understand why her issue or what her issue has to do with my kids' like education, or what all this has to do with really this class 3 officer being in the school. I just don't really see what the problem is yet. I've been hearing a lot of people upset about it, but nobody knows why, or nobody's saying why. I don't know. It's just frustrating. That's what I'm getting at.
All right, thanks, Connor. Jamie Legg.
Hi, Tony. It's actually Lindsay. We switch it up a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So yeah, I kind of echo a lot of the same sentiment as Michael, and I appreciated so much Miss French's what she had to say. She's a teacher at Lambertville, and also Terry Hoyer, who's also a teacher at Lambertville. So I guess, and obviously I've mentioned a few times that I'm a substitute teacher, and I have children at West Amwell, but I love going to Lambertville to sub. I think, to me, also what I'm not hearing a lot of tonight, and I know you did a phenomenal job at the beginning of this, explaining why we have the officers there. And, just again, as, a substitute teacher at Lambertville, I'll be very honest with you. I would not feel very safe being a teacher, specifically at Lambertville, because you are so exposed being outside. And I think it needs to be mentioned that, as a substitute teacher, as an aide, you're usually the one that is outside with the children at recess. It's not normally, the teachers that are there. It's usually the substitutes and aides. And a lot of times it's, it's women that are a little bit older, or women in general, and not to be, stereotypical of gender or anything, but I would just say that, there's not a lot of training about we're basically out there with these children, and having the police officer there. I know for the few years that I've subbed, I feel so just comforted by that fact. I mean, I've seen people come into the parking lot. I've seen people sleep there. There's just a lot of things. I think it's very important. And I think we should really note and take a lot of thought into what the teachers, the people that at the schools that, that have the experience, what their opinion is. And again, we have 2 amazing officers at Lambertville. We have an amazing officer at West Amwell. I don't sub as much at the middle school or the high school, but I really think it should be noted, why we brought these police officers there, not the sentiment of the feeling of, what's going on in the country, but more specifically is what their purpose is in our community, in our school. And I, again, just go back to when you're out at recess or out for physical ed, you have the gym teacher, but you also have just a sub or an aide that is outside with the children, unless you have the police officer, which we do right now. We have the lack of security cameras at our schools. Every single room in both elementary schools has an access door that can be, if you let somebody in, which I have also been a teacher there, and I've watched a teacher open up a door, and there was somebody there for a specific holiday in a white van that was there that meant to go to the main office, but the door to the classroom was opened. So again, that was kind of a security issue. Thankfully, it was, a genuine person that was just trying to get to the main office. There's also the response time. We have these wonderful people there. They're not a threat. There's no complaints. There hasn't been anything negative that I've heard yet, except for just some genuine sentiment from people of how they personally feel about police officers. So I really would hope that, and I appreciate so much what I know that you are obviously taking all of these facts and things into consideration, but I really would hope that our community would really consider and think about why we do have the police officers there. I mean, honestly, if somebody has a sentiment that they're afraid of a police officer because they're being pulled over, they're probably being pulled over because they did something wrong. So I'm just going to say, I have that feeling when a police officer pulls me over because I was probably speeding or whatever. So I think the generalization should not really be brought into why we would even bring the police officers or take them away from our schools. I think it should be more of what purpose they serve. And I appreciate so much the people that did vocalize how amazing our officers are. And also too, Tony, I know that you would be the one that would be, or I don't know how the interview process is or how it works that they are hired, but I know that you would take heavy consideration into who you were hiring to bring into the school. And we already have, again, the most amazing officers there. So I know that you would really take that into consideration. So those are my closing thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Suzo. And I also wanted to say thank you to Dr. Blankman as well. I found the presentation really helpful, especially the specifics around staffing. And I will follow up because I am interested in learning more about that. I wanted to come back to something, and I also wanted to say thank you to Elizabeth for sharing some things about some of the incidents, racist incidents that have happened, whether on social media or at the high school. And, as I'm hearing people asking the question about, okay, well, why? I think that is why. I think that when these kinds of incidents are happening in a school, a place of learning, I feel like one of the questions we have to ask is what is happening in that space that is creating the environment that has fostered that, right? And because that's not just about, who didn't talk to their child about racism, and that's not going to be fixed with a 2-day training, right? That's about, you need structural change to address that, right? That requires structural change. And I think for those of us who are asking for the removal of the Class 3 officers, it's because that's structural, right? That is acknowledging that as a community, we are not in a bubble, right? We exist in a larger nation, in a larger world, and we are impacted by that, right? And as I listen to people talking about how much you love your Class 3 officer, I think that one of the things that I'm not hearing anyone really sort of considering is that, is it possible that your experience with that person might be different if you were living in a Black or brown body, right? Like, how do we sort of empathize with people who don't feel as comfortable, as opposed to being dismissive to that? Because that's what I'm hearing a lot of. I feel comfortable, so they should too, right? Without really thinking about what's happening structurally here. What message does that send, right, to those students who are already feeling marginalized, right? And to the students who feel empowered to marginalize those students, right? The students who have engaged in these sort of incidents, these racist incidents that have taken place on campus. And it seems to me that when something like that is happening, you go in and you make structural change, right? Because what I'm hearing is like, we could do a training, we'll do an anti-bias. Like, how do you convey through the structures of power in your institution, right? That those students who are marginalized are valued? How do you bring them to the center of the conversation? And this is one of the ways to do it, to say, hey, we acknowledge that you have been marginalized, and we acknowledge that we have put structures in place that have disempowered you, right? And how, so I guess what I'm arguing is that this is about structural change. And I think that's what many people in Lambertville have been saying all along. I also just want to point out, these people have only been here for 2 years. Somehow this school managed for more time than not without class 3 officers. And yet I'm hearing people talking, right, as if they are as necessary as teachers, right? Somehow all of this stuff was getting done, and I am interested in inquiring more about roles of these officers, in part because I'm hearing things about stuck doors and traffic. And I mean, these are roles that can be fulfilled by other staff members in a community. And I don't, and even in terms of safety consulting, there are people who get paid to do safety consulting. I'm not clear on why they're carrying a gun either, for that matter. In the course of this conversation, the thought of them breaking up a fight while a weapon is actually on them is disturbing to me as well. And I continue to think about this desire to diversify staff, and how do you do that when you have this history of racist incidents happening in the school and there's no evidence of any sort of structural change being put in place to address that. Yeah, I will. I do want to ask a question. I want to know more about the role of the class 3 officers. In particular, if they do see something suspicious, you said that they've never arrested anyone. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is, can they? It's one thing to say they've never done it. What I want to know is, do they have that power? And does the school district have the ability to limit their power in any way, given that these officers don't answer to the school district? My understanding is they answer to the police department.
It's not. I'll answer that question. No, that's not their role. Their role is not to handle a situation where they would be even in a situation to arrest us. And as I indicated in my slide deck, that's something that the administration would work with our lieutenants in both municipalities, and that would be handled by that enforcement. That would not be handled by the class 3 officer. It's not their role.
And so I hear you saying it's not their role. And is that, but do they answer to the police department or the district? That's what I'm trying to understand.
They answer to the police department, but obviously we have an impact on what their role is in the building.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Samantha.
Hi there.
Hello.
Nice to see you. I have a daughter that's an 8th grader at West Amwell. Her name is Carly, and my son is a senior and has long been we've been a part of the district for a very long time. I thank you for the time that you put into this. I know that you've been very busy spending time not only on the facilities issue, but getting the students back to school. So thank you, and thank you to the administration for all of your hard work. My big concern regarding this issue really is that it's taking the attention away from the other issues that I just mentioned. I'd like to echo what Michael Strauss said. My family is a huge fan of Mr. Bartzak. He has been a part of our community for a very long time. And my daughter and his daughter started kindergarten together. So I've had a very long time history with the Bartzak family, and they've been nothing but outstanding members of the community, always working with the kids and being a part of things. I don't have enough nice things to say. That said, the issues regarding people of color being concerned about issues with officers, whether it's at West Amwell or Lambertville. We are all one community, right? And we all want to make our kids feel safe. And I think the most important thing we can do is education. Through education, we can create and foster better relationships. If there are people who are concerned about that, I think the only way to do that is to show them that our law enforcement is safe and willing to work with them. And I think, your suggestion about keeping the officers and reassessing is fantastic. And I think going forward, when the facilities issue has been addressed, I think at that point, security will be reassessed because our buildings are not adequate right now to handle issues that could potentially happen. And while the concerns that are being mentioned are more of a national concern than a local concern, I do agree with Michael Strauss again and say, let's be the example instead of just, let's do what everybody else is doing. So that's all I wanted to say. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Alicia.
Sorry, it took me a minute to get unmuted. So I'd like to echo thank you for the presentation and for having the conversation. I think that's really good. I'm calling, my daughter luckily is already graduated, but as a member of the community and as a member of the community who's really trying to look at equity and racial equity and inclusion and social justice, as well as just safety, I don't think that we need class 3 officers with guns in the school. The presentation before talked about social and mental health. I think that money would be more wisely spent on a social mental health type counselor to support the children for dealing with the pandemic and dealing with racism which exists in this community. People may want to whitewash it and say this is hunky-dory, but there's been a lot of animosity lately. Confederate flags flying in certain parts of town, and it doesn't make me feel safe, and it doesn't make a lot of my friends feel very safe to see that. But the class 3 officer is not going to address that. Additionally, there really is no justification. God forbid we have somebody who's mentally ill with a gun. The class 3 officer is not going to change that dynamic in any way, shape, or form. There's no data that shows it. So I think that's a false feeling of security by having that person there. The woman who said just before that she thinks that Ely Field is unsafe because it's out in the open. I'm not sure why you would feel that would be unsafe if Lambertville and this West Amwell in our community is so kind and friendly. Why would that be unsafe? And God forbid, what would one person with a gun, good guy with a gun, what would they do? God forbid, somebody mentally unstable with an automatic machine gun or a rifle or whatever you want to call it. I know I'm not using the correct language around that. I think really with the limited budget that we have, and we have very limited budget, and we're all trying to make our children be the most well-adjusted young citizens of the world, they need more investment into their social and mental health and stability than they need having an armed guard in the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexandra. Alexandra Bird? No?
Yes, hello. I think it's working now.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name's Alexandra Bird. I've been in Lambertville for a couple years now, but the rest of my family's been well established in town for a while. My sister would very much like to be here tonight, but she's a teacher and music therapist, so she's currently teaching. She's not in support of the class 3 officers and that she would like to express herself. But for me, I'm the mom of twin girls who have just registered actually a couple weeks ago to start kindergarten in the fall. They're children of color, and they are very, very excited to start school. And I'm really looking forward to their school years being a positive experience, where they'll grow academically, but also learn to support and include and be included by the community. I understand both sides where we're all coming from, because we're all here for the same reason. We're here because for the well-being and safety of our children, whether we're parents, caretakers, grandparents, teachers, etc. We're all involved in children's lives, and that is the most important thing for us, is to ensure that they are well loved by the community, well taken care of, what they feel secure, and that they are in an environment where they can grow and contribute in a positive way to each other's well-being. I've been doing research as much as I can. I'm fairly new to the topic, but I have trouble understanding where the Class 3 officers can really provide the safety that our children need, that other staff or other people wouldn't be able to do. Instead, I taught myself for many years, and as a young, very young female teacher, I was in charge of very large groups of students outside in open areas, and I would have loved to have had help, but I wouldn't have needed an armed police officer. I would need extra eyes, extra people to help look out if a child is hurt, if a child is wandering away, any communication that needs to be done with parents so that someone's attention can constantly be watching the children. A gun, presence of a gun would not have helped me. I do know several other families, unfortunately, which I wish my children would be in the school with. They will not be. They have removed their children from the school, and other families who are choosing not to send their children to the school for that reason. And if we are to have Class 3 officers or any security protection in the school, I really don't understand why they need to be armed. Something that's very important to me is that my children learn that guns are not toys. We do not play with guns, water guns, BB guns, you name it, they do not come into the house. And I also try and show, for me anyway, to display to them that guns are not the solution to our problems. There are other ways to resolve issues peacefully, and other ways to get help than relying on an armed weapon. And even just seeing them, having them in the classroom, in the school environment, for me is a negative, violent display, even if the officer carrying them can be the gentlest, kind-hearted officer possible. Just the presence. So I don't understand why they need to be armed if they are to be on the school premises. That being said, at least here in Lambertville, the police station is very close to the school to begin with, and I think police do have a role in our community. But I think we have a lot of work to do to make that role a positive one, and I don't think they need to be in the daily lives of the children. I've never talked on Zoom before. I've been trying to attend the meetings. I've got little kids in the background here. I'm not a natural speaker, so I hope that some of what I'm trying to say has come through, but I'm very grateful that you all are here, that everyone is being heard, and yeah, we all have the same goal and we'll get there. But we might be needing a few compromises and a lot of listening and a lot of working together. But yeah, and so anyway, thanks for holding this meeting tonight. And
Thank you,
I will
Alexandra.
the next person. Have a good night.
Thank you. Kelly Bolding.
Hi.
Hello.
One sec, let me fix my audio. Okay, that's better. So thank you for the thoughtful presentation and for taking this issue seriously. I just wanted to address a few things that came up in the comments. The first is the fact that nothing violent has happened in the 2 years that we've had the Class 3 officers is statistically insignificant, because the overall incidence of school shootings is so low in general that we can't really make any inferences about causality from that. So I just think that that should be not part of the conversation. Sharon mentioned this already, and I also take issue with the suggestion that the solution to addressing the national crisis of police brutality in our local community is by education and changing students' perceptions or fears of police. So maybe we happen to have good police officers in our community at this time, but we're doing children, and particularly children of color, a disservice by only preparing them for our bubble and not for the world that they are going to grow up to live in. And just to address those who are asking why people are concerned about officers, there are plenty of studies showing that Black, Indigenous, and students of color bear the brunt of negative impacts of having police in schools. There's also evidence that officers get involved with disciplinary matters even when they're not supposed to, and that there's a statistical correlation between having resource officers in schools and increased instances of disciplinary matters being referred to police departments instead of being handled internally by the school, which results in the criminalization of children. And I'm glad, Mr. Souza, that you're interested in speaking to students and community members from minoritized communities, because I think their voices are really necessary for this conversation. But the fact that we are a majority white community means that the numbers are always going to skew towards privileging how white people feel about police. But how white people feel about police will never tell the full picture. And honestly, it's not that relevant. And I say that as a white person. The result of a lot of these conversations is that the positive experiences of many white people with police, and including the resource officers at the school, will be used to invalidate or drown out the experiences of people of color who've been harmed by the police or who don't want police in their schools. And I think that's part of, what's unfortunately happening here tonight. So my concern is just that if we base our decision on the opinions and anecdotes of our majority white community, we're going to cause more harm to the folks in our community who are minoritized. So I agree with Dr. Jackson that we need a structural change to address this as a structural issue. And I hope that the school district moves in that direction rather than pursuing well-meaning but ineffective reform measures. Thanks.
Thank you. Corky Brown.
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks for providing a platform for the community. We really appreciate it. A lot of my my fellow community members made some great points about the Class 3 officers, and I just had a few other points to make, building on them. In the initial presentation, I didn't notice anything that required an officer in particular, especially one that was armed. If school shooting is the concern, that wasn't mentioned, and like Kelly just said, kind of statistically insignificant in our community because we haven't had one, and the officers only started a couple of years ago, and we had no incidents prior to that as well. So I think the role that these officers are filling could be filled by another faculty member that could do all of those things and the things that they can't do, such as discipline. So I just don't understand the need for an officer with a gun. I just don't see any evidence or any reason that has been presented that requires an officer with a gun. And my last point is just that I want to reiterate that this is not a personal attack on any of the officers in our community. It's far from that. Nobody is calling out Officer Jerry personally. It's kind of absurd to think that. This is a national conversation, and we are a community that's part of a larger picture. And we need to remember that, like Kelly just said, these people in our community, the kids, are part of a larger picture. And they're not just going to stay in our little bubble, our very rural white bubble, in many cases. So let's just keep the bigger picture in mind here. And there's no reason to mention how nice our officers are. It just doesn't help the conversation. Thanks.
Colette. Colette? No Colette? All right.
Hello?
Oh, go ahead, Colette. You there? No? Okay. Manisha, we'll go back to you.
Okay, I will put my video on too. So I heard a lot about why do we not want a police officer. I think that a lot of people have given the reasons as to why we feel like there is not a need. I've heard a lot about, oh, they're great, the children love them. That's not what their role is from what you showed us earlier in the presentation. What most of these people talked about with the buddy is, and like helping out in the playground, helping out in recess. Those are, we should invest in teachers' aides. If we don't have enough staff to be helping the teachers during recess or lunch, then there should be teachers' aides that we should be looking at, not at a officer. That's not what their role is supposed to be. So I don't feel that the school needs a safety officer. And the reasons that were given were, they're there to protect us. They really aren't, they're not going to be able to protect us because they don't have that role either, because it's the police that would have to be called in. And being someone of color, I have been racially profiled, and I'm going to say this as someone who is of color, and I'm probably going to piss off most of the people on this call, but there's a lot of white privilege going on here, because you can't understand the fear that you have of police if you haven't lived in those shoes. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Crystal. Walton.
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. Hi, Tony. Thank you. My son has something he would like to say in response to Ms. Durkee's comment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My name is Travis. I'm from West Amwell School.
Hey, it's Travis.
I would like to be a part of the elementary discussion if there is one held. Thank you very much.
Who was
Thank
that?
you. And I didn't, I'll follow up because I didn't answer Sarah's question. I do think that is a possibility. We could definitely put together some kids from the elementary, depending upon age appropriate, and we can facilitate those conversations, no doubt. All right, we have about 3 left, I think, and then we'll kind of wrap up as we get to 9 o'clock. So Erica, I'll go back to you. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I'm here.
That's okay.
I'm gonna be blunt, and I might upset a few people.
Just
but
make sure we keep it civil. That's what this whole.
yeah, it's civil. It's my life. So I know that, I'm white, and I know that people speak about white privilege and everything, but I'm just gonna give you my real life scenario. I have an older son who is in a locked mental facility, and I had the opportunity to visit him until, COVID kind of screwed that up. So I haven't been able to go in person in quite a while. But all of the officers, every single one of them, except for one, is African American. And they look at me and I look at them like we are people. We are there because they are there because they probably took a job in the beginning, but they could have then left and gotten any other job, but their hearts get wrapped up into it, and they want to make an impact in whatever way they can. So I'm there because I have no choice. And they could, just log me in as a number. They could take my license and, have me just sit there. But the very first thing that the officer said to me, the first officer that I met there, was, "We're just glad you're here." And that was on a very human level. And that is a real life scenario where people have to interact with each other on a human level. the resource officers were approved by the state of New Jersey. If I'm incorrect, correct me. But I seem to remember that when we had this conversation 3 years ago, that they were approved by the state of New Jersey because enough people thought that they would be an asset to school districts. So then we had our conversation, we hired our officers. There was, a lot of back and forth at that time. And here we are, we have these officers. I agree with whoever it was that said that our kids are very impressionable. The way we speak about the officers and the way we conduct ourselves around the officers are all also going to rub off on our children. I don't see why we wouldn't want our kids to have positive interactions with the police officers, because they are going to be forever a part of their life. And in regards to the Route 29, Ely Field, whatever, the playground at LPS, it's not just the community members that we have to worry about. Yes, we do have great community members, and everyone is very friendly to each other when they walk by each other, not knowing political affiliations or how they feel about class 3 officers. Everybody's very friendly to each other, but we are very exposed right there. You're right on a state highway that is heavily traveled, and there is that parking lot there where I've seen transient vehicles there. There's a sign right there that says they can't stay overnight, but I've seen vehicles parked there for lengthy amounts of time. And I've seen some people there that don't seem like they're part of the community. They seem like they're moving through. So in regards to that, I think that having the officer there, you're saying the officer, it scares you when people are saying that it scares them when a police officer pulls up behind them. Whether or not they did something wrong, I get that feeling. We've all had it, because you don't want to get a ticket most of the time. I get that. I get that for other people, there's a different level of fear, and I can't understand that because I don't experience that myself. But that's why they're there. They're a deterrent, for like the same reason the police officers before we had class 3 officers would park one of the vehicles in the parking lot. It's a deterrent. So having them there standing at the roadside while the kids are playing outside, it's a deterrent. Maybe they're not going to be a superhero and be able to stop somebody from doing horrible things, but I know for certain will try. So I just wanted to speak my piece because it is a very upsetting topic. And I'm hearing a lot about racism as the overtone of the conversation tonight, and not specifically about our class 3 officers that were approved by the state of New Jersey and hired by our district.
Thank you. All right, Sean, we're going to wrap it up with you. Go ahead. You've been waiting a while.
Thank you so much. I want to speak to that last point that Erica made, because nobody on the side of, not renewing the contract of class 3 officers is saying anything bad about the individuals in those roles. The problem we have, and I want to go back to Shara's point about, fear that we all have from police, comes from systemic reasons. And, the fact that police can act with impunity and are almost never held accountable for mistakes, misconduct, even murder, is very troubling. And, the fact that you've also admitted, Dr. Suzo, that we don't have jurisdiction over them. There's no recourse if something happens, and we know how it goes with police investigations. And this is why we're fearful of police. And this is a big problem. And we just don't have the kind of authority over them that I think we believe they have. And I also want to talk to the point about Michael spoke very passionately about, how positive the interactions are. But again, like Manisha said, this goes back to your plan. They're not supposed to be having those interactions. And I don't know how you feel about that, but that it's really not about these individual officers. It's really about the systemic problem with the police, and That's what I have a problem with.
Thanks, Sean. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up. You know, what I'll say is, and just to kind of finalize and end, you know, as far as the interactions with the kids, I mean, they are human beings, right? So as much as they're there for safety and security, and obviously that's really important, you know, we also want them to be human beings. So with kids and treat kids just like anyone else, you know, any other adult in their experience during the school, they would treat them. So I appreciate that the dialogue and the discussion. As I mentioned, I will email out tomorrow the slide deck that I used tonight, as well as the recording. So, and I will also post it on our website. So if anyone has anyone who they know maybe wanted to attend but were unable, just kind of spread the word that they will be able to access it. So I thank you again for the discourse, and I look forward to continued conversations. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Tony.